you'd like me to recommend you a book, I could do that. I just got done reading these books, and I like them all, so I think they're the best to start off with. The last book I just read was Truman Capote's Breakfast at Tiffany's. It's not very much like the movie when I was reading it. I think the movie had I don't know, it was kind of the same but different, just like every other movie adaptation, or rather book adaptation into a movie. But I liked it. It was nice and it was an easy read, and it's only 142 pages. So, Truman Capote's Breakfast at Tiffany. I'll set it aside. This one is called Obsessive Genius, The Inner World of Marie Curie by Barbara Goldsmith. I think Violet was one who recommended this book to me. She likes Marie Curie and, you know, Ada Lovelace. You know, they're female scientists and inventors and whatnot. But this basically is a biography on her work. I'm not a big fan of biographies, though. I like it more when they go in depth towards the process of their thinking rather than what they experienced in their life, because getting to know how they thought was a lot more interesting than knowing who they married and how many kids they have. But it also is interesting to read when you're figuring out what she did when it comes to chemicals and how it all came about, but that's really the most interesting part. Everything else is kind of boring, like her having a lover and her husband dying when he was walking outside and getting hit by a carriage and stuff like that. The next book is Memoirs of Geisha by Arthur Golden. I really like the prose and the metaphors in this book. It was very pretty, and it really allowed you to sink into the novel, and it was incredibly detailed. That's what I liked about this book. It was like, it reminded me of Lolita, but at the same time, I feel like this one didn't focus so much on prose, but on metaphors, and the metaphors were incredibly beautiful. I would definitely recommend it for that. But this is the cover. It's basically about a young woman who's a geisha who falls in love with a rich man. And unfortunately, geishas aren't allowed to really fall in love because their trade is bringing pleasure to all men, whether it be in their company or, you know, more nighttime sort of thrills. But it's a good read. I liked it, and once more, I think I just really love the metaphors. Like, I would reread this book just for the metaphors, because they were amazing. Just thinking about it made me kind of nostalgic, even though I just got done reading it. This one is Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. This one, what award did it get? It got the National Book Award. But this one's really interesting too. It's about a guy who's a firefighter, but it's not like the conventional firefighters that we know. It's people who go out to burn books because I forgot what the reason was. I think it was because society didn't want people reading, but I forgot what the reason as to why that was. I'm tilting more towards the generic answer of it being just that they didn't want the populace to be educated and having their own opinions, but I couldn't quite state with certainty because it's been, 2 hours since I read this, so it's been a while. But I do like the ending. The ending was very good, and I think it kind of inspires readers like myself to see how well they can remember what they read. But it's a good book. It's also kind of short. Let's see how long it is. This is 165 pages, so not at all long. Memoirs of a Geisha was, I think, the longest book that I've read so far. This one is 428 pages. And then Obsessive Genius book, The Inner Mind of Marie Curie, is 233. So I think a lot of these books are just going to kind of stay in the 100 to 200 page realm, I guess. Next one up is a very common book that everyone's kind of read. It's called Lord of the Flies by William Golding. And how many pages does this have? Oh, it's 208. No, 202. Yep, 202. Basically it's just about I would say a town full of boys, like between the ages of like 10 and 14, who were on a ship. The ship crashed. They ended up on an island, and it kind of goes through the deterioration of, you know, quote unquote civilized people becoming savages, in the sense that, you know, they were very easy to, actually, I won't go so much into detail as I was about to, but basically it's that. It's just the degenerative effects of being left alone within a society that you have to build up yourself, even though you've come from a civilized society. And I think the reason why William Golding wrote this is because there was another book out, and I forgot what its name was. But basically the book was kind of praising civilized people and saying we were above that. And William Golding is kind of saying, no, we're not above that. At any moment we could snap. It kind of goes into the Joker quote where madness is like gravity, it's just a push away. So that's kind of the premise of the story. The next story is called Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. This one's actually really wow, this one's really short. I never noticed how short this one was. It's only 105 pages, and it's considered a classic novel. Basically it goes through it goes through the adventures of George and Lenny. George is it's very much like film noir, where you have like that short guy with like the fast talking voice, and then Lenny, who's like, you know, the tall brute, the muscle, kind of lingering behind him, or like Pinky in the Brain, even though Pinky wasn't strong, but he was, you know, taller than him, and Brain was the brain of the operations, although there's some conspiracy theories around that show that indicate that Brain was actually, you know, like schizophrenic, and Pinky was actually the smart one. But basically it kind of goes through their adventures, and Lenny kind of they're both criminals on the run, but Lenny gets George into a lot of trouble that he doesn't want to get into. So it kind of goes from there. And I think Lenny is George's nephew, if I'm not mistaken. I think they're related by blood, but I could be mistaken because it has been a couple of hours since I read that one. The next one is supposedly a very controversial story. Let's see how many pages this has. This one is honestly the best story I've written, or not the story, but like the best written story I've ever read. It's 309 pages, and it's called Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. And the reason it's so controversial is because it kind of explores the romance of Humbert Humbert and Dolores Hayes, who's the eponymous Lolita. And Lolita is 12 years old when the novel starts, and she's 17 when it ends. And she obviously has a relationship, supposedly, a romantic relationship with a man who's 38, if I'm not mistaken. He might be in his 40s, but for some reason I tilt towards it being 38. And it becomes, you know, sexual, and because of that it's considered to be this sort of disgusting graphic novel that was banned in England, I believe it was where it was published originally, and the only place that accepted it was in France, but even then it was kind of limited, because they thought it was some sort of like vulgar sort of fan fiction of a dirty old man. But when you read about it, when you really read it, it's not at all graphic. It doesn't really have, like, there is like small moments towards the ending of the beginning that has you know, romantic connotations to it, but throughout the entire novel it's just really him kind of developing this sort of world and imagination inside his head, much like a girl does whenever she has a crush on a guy, only the reverse. That's very interesting to see, because I think the most interesting part about the novel is just how unreliable a narrator Humbert Humbert is, and yet he drags you into his fantasies and makes you question your perspective on what is right and wrong. And obviously in the end you have to like say, you know, no, that is inherently wrong, but still his prose, his intelligence, his education, his way of explaining things is very much, it makes you feel like he's the one in the right. It reminds me of the Telltale Hearts narrator, where he kind of says, you know, oh, you might think me mad, but look with how careful a position, look how careful I was when kind of walking into the old man's bedroom, look how careful I was with disposing of the body and whatnot. And you kind of think, oh, well, this guy's, you know, he's not at all crazy, but inherently he's crazy. And that's what I like about this story. That and the prose, as I already said. The prose is very beautiful. Like, there's only one line in this, well, there's like a lot of it that's really creepy, but there's only one line that creep me out, and even that line was well written. Like, it was disturbing, but it was well written. The next story is F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby, which is also another story that a lot of people have read for school. Let's see. This book is 228 pages. I really liked this story too. Like, all of these stories I really liked, except Marie Curie's, because that's not a story, that's a biography, even though it's a story of her life. But the reason I like this book is because it's one, I like F. Scott Fitzgerald. I like all of the Lost Generation writers, Ernest Hemingway, his wife, Zelda Fitzgerald, his wife. I like all of them, because it's like they are who the adolescents of today, kind of the same age, because they were all born in like the late 90s and early 2000s and mid 2000s, some of them. So it's very interesting to kind of compare those people to people nowadays that are considered young. But I like this story because it's kind of delves into the materialistic nature of the 20s and how everyone was kind of living by the, you know, by the seats of their chairs and whatnot. And it's interesting to see how well he uses metaphors to kind of push forward what's really going on in the underlying current. And I also like the way he writes Daisy and Tom, because I don't like either of them, but at the same time they were the majority of people at the time, living during the time. And even though the movies don't have, or at least the newest movie didn't mention Daisy and Tom having a child, they do have a child, and it's just never mentioned. She's never really shown in the book, because they just don't have, they have no care for the responsibilities, and that's kind of how F. Scott Fitzgerald pushed forward that idea of them being so reckless. But I like it, and I also like the fact that I think it was published in 1926, which was 3 years before the Great Depression. So it's kind of ironic to see how in the end it ended so tragically with, you know, it ended tragically. I don't want to ruin it, even though it's been out for like, what, 90 years? But it's a good book. I definitely recommend it. The next one is 244 pages, and it's called The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. And unfortunately this book has been kind of ruined by the romantic ideals of the typical college girl, reference to another director, because they typically kind of say, they romanticize the suicidal nature of this book, but in reality it's much more of yet another person kind of going through their day-to-day life, questioning, you know, their life and whatnot. And I like it because it matches, in my opinion, it's very complimentary to the next book I'm going to recommend you. But it's very whimsical yet depressing, and it kind of has a surreal tinge to it, because there is no, you know, this happened, then this happened, and this happened, and then at the end this happened. It's much more of a process of thinking, and that's what I like. I like books that go through the thinking process rather than a plot, you know, a linear plot sort of premise. But the next book that I'm going to recommend you, which once more I do believe is complimentary to The Bell Jar, is called Catcher in the Rye, and it's 275 pages by J.D. Salinger. And once more, this book is very complimentary to Baudelaire because it travels through Holden Caulfield's, the other one's Esther Greenwood, thought process, and how he kind of analyzes the world and sees the world in a very pessimistic view, and how he thinks everything's phony, and he kind of goes through sort of like a mini existential crisis in one night. But once more, it's not a very linear plot. It focuses much more on the thought process, and that's what I like reading about. Thought processes, and also instructional books, because, how else am I supposed to save my family from a train tracks? Or, every other peril that we're faced with Count Olaf chasing us. But, I really do recommend the last two books being read together, even though The Catcher in the Rye supposedly inspired three killers. But, I think they were just using that as an excuse, because The Catcher in the Rye is not at all, source for murder. But, did any of these books catch your attention? Okay. Alright, and so, you wanted these two last books together. Lolita? Okay. Lolita. You can only check out 5 books, unfortunately. Okay. Let me see. Memoirs of a Geisha. So yeah, 4 down, and then what was the last book you wanted to check out from the pile? Of Mice and Men. Okay. Yeah, this one's, I think Of Mice and Men was the shortest one that I've recommended you so far. So let me simply make a note of it, and then I'll check them out to you. So, Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. Let me just remove the metallic part of the book. Memoirs of a Geisha by Arthur Golden. Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. And The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. Alright, there you go. Your books are all checked out to you, so they're due back in 2 weeks, so make sure you bring them back in 2 weeks, otherwise they're overdue. So have fun reading. Hello, hello, hello. Did you miss me?